everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my March wrap-up. I'm hoping that I will be able to get this posted before like the middle of April. Hopefully I'll be able to have a quick turnaround and get this up early in April. But my filming schedule got a little bit thrown off recently because I actually got my COVID vaccine, which is very exciting and totally worth throwing off my filming schedule for. But I got a notification for like, you know, an available appointment, and I just took whatever they had, and then for like a day or two afterwards I was a little bit like tired and achy, and it just like threw off my filming schedule, which, as I said, totally worth it. But yeah, so I'm a little behind on my videos. I'm gonna try and have a quick turnaround and get these up as soon as I can, but let's get started talking about my March reading. So overall, my March reading was really good. I really liked a lot of the stuff that I read in March. I got through, I think, 10 books, and I had 2 DNFs, and I had one book that I really didn't like, but overall, I really enjoyed what I was reading. So the 2 DNFs that I had were People of the Book by Geraldine Brooks and Mother Ocean, Daughter Sea by Diana Marcellus. And as always, I'll be talking about these in my seasonal DNFs video, which I guess the next one for spring will be coming out in June. So onto the books that I actually completed. First up, I have a whole series that I binged, which was the Truth series by Dawn Cook. So the first book is First Truth, the second book is Hidden Truth, the third book is Forgotten Truth, and the final book is Lost Truth. This is an awkward way to be holding these books. Okay, so this series is a fantasy series that is set in a world where there are 3 main regions. There is the foothills, the plains, and the coast, and there's a rivalry, a long-standing rivalry between the foothills and the plains, and the coast is kind of like just off doing its own thing. And our main character is named Alyssa. She lives in the foothills with her mother, but her mother is from the plains and her father was from the foothills, and it's almost unheard of for people from the plains and the foothills to marry and have children, and so they are very isolated in the foothills and really not accepted by the community. And Alyssa's father used to tell her stories about magic and this place called the Hold, where masters and keepers taught and learned magic, and she never really thought that, you know, magic was real or the Hold was a real place. But at the beginning of the story, her mother tells her that her father had magic and she may have inherited that magic as well, and so she has to go find the Hold in order to learn how to use her magic. So she is like kind of sent off into the world to do that, and along the way she encounters a traveling musician who's from the plains, and the two of them don't really like each other at first, but they're traveling in the same direction, so they end up traveling together. And when they arrive at the Hold, they find out that 1, it does exist, and 2, it's pretty much abandoned. There's only 1 keeper left named Balak, and he is very suspicious and has some nefarious and ulterior motives. And he and Alyssa are both searching for this like lost magical book, and he is hoping to manipulate and use Alyssa in order to help find it. And this series, I had a really fun time reading. So this was a reread for me, and the first time I read this series, I read them physically. This time I listened to the audiobooks, and I actually really enjoyed the audiobooks. You know what? I'm just gonna hold up this first book. I really enjoyed this world. I really liked the way the world building was done. It's not like a super expansive, detailed world, but I think that she does a really good job of giving you a really strong feel for the world and the cultures in it, and I just really liked the way that it was woven into the narrative and the character point of views and all of that. I really liked the characters in this, and I think that's really the strength of this. It's pretty slow paced, and it mostly just takes place at the Hold. There's a lot of time spent like learning and teaching magic and like talking about and describing magic, and there definitely is a plot, but it's very slow moving. But I think it's really propelled by the characters and the relationships, and I really enjoyed these characters. I think there are things about them that I could definitely see people maybe getting frustrated with, especially with the main character. But I really liked her, and I really liked all of the characters. There's also a love triangle in this, which maybe people won't like if they don't like love triangles, but I enjoyed it. The love triangle has both a like hate to love slow burn romance and also a like predestined I have waited hundreds of years for you romance. This has just like a lot of story elements that I thought were really fun. It has an abandoned magic school, it has a lost or a cursed city, it has dragons, and there's telepathy, there's an animal companion, there's time travel and a sea voyage, and there's just like so many different things to this that I think were a lot of fun. But overall, really what kind of kept me engaged with it was how much I enjoyed these characters and their relationships. I have a full review for this series that I will link below if you want more detail on this. Oh, and also I gave the first book in the series 4 stars, the second book 3.5 stars, and then the third and fourth books both 4 stars. Then I read Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb, which is the third and final book in the Tawny Man trilogy and the 9th book in the Realm of the Elderlings, and completing this means that I finally finished the Tawny Man trilogy, because for some reason with this trilogy I was reading 1 book a year. It took me 3 years to read this one trilogy, even though I did definitely enjoy this trilogy, or this installment, you know, in the larger world of the Realm of the Elderlings. But yeah, so I'm not gonna go in depth into this one because it's pretty far into the Realm of the Elderlings, so I can't really talk without spoilers at this point. But overall, I had very similar experience with this as I did with most of my other like reads from Robin Hobb, in that I really enjoyed it overall. I really love her writing. I really like this world. I think her characters are really interesting and well developed and just very compelling characters. I did still have some gripes about it, and there are just like certain story choices and plot choices that she makes that kind of rub me the wrong way or leave me slightly dissatisfied with it. But overall, I really liked it, and I gave this one 4 stars. Next, I read Luck in the Shadows by Lynn Flewelling. This is the first in the Night Runner series, which I'm reading as part of the Skalaalong, which I'll link information about that below if you want to know more about the read-along. But yeah, so this is the first book in the series, and in this we're following 2 main characters, Sergal and Alec. Alec has lived a pretty isolated and simple life up to this point, but at the beginning of the story he has wrongfully been put in prison being suspected as a possible spy. But that is where he meets Sergal, who is actually a spy and a thief and other things, and he has the skills to break out of prison. So he does, and he decides to take Alec with him, and then Sergal decides to kind of take Alec under his wing and train him to be whatever it is that Sergal is, and that pulls Alec into this wider world of magic and subterfuge. And I had a really fun time with this book. To be totally honest, I wasn't really paying much attention to the plot of it. I felt like the plot was kind of meandering and kind of just like went in a lot of different directions, and I was much more interested in the characters themselves. So I think that I'll probably become more focused on the plot as the series progresses, but at this point I was just kind of along for the ride, enjoying like the world and the characters. I really liked both of the main characters. At this point I'm not like super emotionally invested in them, but I think that they have potential to be characters that I would really like, and that's what I've heard about this series, is that you spend so much time with Alec and Sergal that you end up really loving them, and I feel like they definitely have potential to be characters that I love. But yeah, one of the things that I kind of liked about this one also is that it just gave me a similar feeling to when I read Lois McMaster Bujold's World of the Five Gods books, which I really love, and so I'm just having a fun time with this one. I gave this one 3.5 stars, and I've heard that the series only gets better from the first book, so I'm really excited to read more from the series. Then I read Daughters of the Storm by Kim Wilkins. This is the first book in an adult fantasy series that is set in this kingdom where the king has 5 daughters. The oldest daughter is meant to inherit the kingdom, but the king is sick and he is dying, and while he is dying, the stepbrother takes this as an opportunity to try and take over the kingdom. And so the 5 sisters, who are all very different from one another, have to figure out how to come together to save their father and the kingdom. And this book, I ended up really not liking it, and it was really disappointing because I was so excited about it at the beginning. I think I talked about this in my last currently reading video. I'd only gotten like 50 pages into the book, but I was really optimistic about it. I was really liking those first 50 pages, and then it really went downhill for me. I think that what I was so excited about in this was that there were these 5 sisters who were all very different in their personalities and in their roles in the kingdom, and they all had very different struggles, and I was really interested in seeing, you know, how these really different sisters, you know, came together or didn't. I don't know. I just thought there would be really interesting, complex characters, and I just really didn't get that. I think the characterization was very shallow. Also, the relationships didn't have the depth that I was hoping for, because one of the things that draws me to a book about, you know, sisters, or really anything that focuses on familial relationships, is that I'm hoping for these really complex familial relationships. And I just didn't think that it did that very well either. I felt like the relationships were pretty shallow and were just kind of over-explained instead of, you know, showing you how these characters related to one another. I also felt like the plot really lacked urgency and tension and intrigue. There are certain choices that the author made that I was like, you just removed any intrigue that was in this story with this like one scene that I found really frustrating. I didn't like the kind of villain character who's the stepbrother. I thought he was really not an interesting villain, and a lot of things ended up being kind of accidents, and it just was like, I don't know, he just like really was not a very interesting or complex or compelling villain. And he also didn't feel very threatening, and then they would just kind of make him like do random cruel things to be like, haha, he's mean. I was like, okay. I also didn't like the way that the book handled disability, because there are 2 characters with disabilities, and I just like didn't think that they were handled very well. One of them is a little boy who is about 9 or 10 years old, and he is blind and has, I think, some kind of developmental disability. We don't, you know, get an exact term for it because it's fantasy. But I just really didn't like the way that it was handled for this character, because through a series of events, the stepbrother, who's like the villain of this, ends up taking care of this little boy, and it seemed like that character's main purpose was to kind of like humanize the villain, because they're like, see, he could have killed this boy, but he didn't, so he can't be all bad. And I just really didn't like the way that the character, I felt like he was being treated as like a prop for the purpose of this other character's development, and that the little boy really didn't have much personality or agency for himself. So I didn't really like the way his character was handled. And then later on in the book, there's another character who's a man that has a physical disability, and the way that his disability is described is that it makes his movements effeminate and makes him sexless. Also not handled super well. So there were a lot of things about this that just were not great, and I did not really enjoy it. It kept me interested enough that I did complete the book, because I did kind of want to know what happened, and I wanted to see if there was something kind of at the end that would redeem it in some way. But I did not feel like it got any better at the end, and I gave this 2 stars. So then I listened to the audiobook of Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is an adult contemporary romance. It is the 3rd and final book in the Brown Sisters trilogy, which I read the first 2 books last year and loved. And this book is now my favorite one of the trilogy. I loved Act Your Age, Eve Brown. It was just so good. But okay, so this book is about Eve Brown, who is the youngest of the Brown sisters, and she doesn't really know what she's doing with her life. And at the beginning of the book, she has just quit her wedding planning job, and her parents are fed up with her and they decide to cut her off. And so they tell her, like, you need to get a job and hold like the same job for at least a year before we start like helping you again. You have to like grow up and prove that you're an adult who can hold down a job. And so Eve is trying to figure out what she's going to do next when she comes across a little bed and breakfast that is advertising that they need a chef. And so she applies for the job. And they at first reject her because she doesn't have the qualifications that they're looking for. But after the interview, she accidentally hits the owner of the bed and breakfast with her car, and then he needs extra help around the bed and breakfast. He doesn't have a lot of other options because he's rejected everybody else who has applied for the job, and so she ends up helping him. And then the two of them fall in love, and it's adorable. Also in this one, the owner of the bed and breakfast, who becomes her like love interest, is autistic, and then throughout the book Eve realizes that she may also be autistic, and the story kind of talks about how autism can look different in women a lot of times, and I just thought that was really interesting as well. And I just loved this book so much, and I loved these characters and their relationship, and it just was so cute. And I don't know, I just like, I loved both of them individually so much, and then the two of them together were so cute, and I felt like this one had a lot of tropes that I really enjoy. There's something about like Talia Hibbert's romances that she just writes with so much heart, and I just love her books so much, and I gave this one 5 stars. This one was just like absolutely fabulous. My new, like, I guess ranking of the 3 books in the series is that Act Your Age Eve Brown is my favorite, then Get a Life Chloe Brown, and then Take a Hint Dani Brown. That's my personal ranking of the books. And then after that, I just wanted another romance. I wanted another like Talia Hibbert romance because I just love the way that she writes these. So then I read Untouchable, also by Talia Hibbert, which is the second book in the Ravenswood trilogy, which is another contemporary romance trilogy that she's written. I read the first book last year also, and I enjoyed that one, but definitely not as much as the Brown Sisters trilogy, which is why I didn't like continue the trilogy right away. But I read the second one, and in this one we're following our main character Hannah, who used to be a teacher. She loved working with kids, but some events in the second book, or in the first book, meant that she lost her job as a teacher, and now she, I think, is working in like a coffee shop or something and trying to figure out what she's going to do next. When this guy named Nate, who she had a crush on in high school, moves back into town with his 2 children, and his wife died a few years ago, and he's moving back into town because his mother is sick and he needs to take care of her, and so he needs someone to help take care of his kids, and he hires Hannah, and then the two of them fall in love, as you do in a romance. Why do I keep hitting my bookcase today? Anyway, so that's the plot of this one, and I had a really fun time with this one also. I didn't love it quite as much as Act Your Age Eve Brown. Like, I like this series also just because I enjoy Talia Hibbert's romances, but I just don't feel like anything else I've read from her like lives up to the Brown Sisters trilogy, because that one's just like so good. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one still. I really enjoyed the characters and their romance, and I had a lot of fun with it. This one I gave 4 stars. And then the last book that I read in March was Entangled Life: How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds, and Shape Our Futures by Merlin Sheldrake, which was a non-fiction book about fungi. And I thought this one was really interesting. I don't have a lot to say about it because I don't really like rate or review the nonfiction that I read, but I did think it was really interesting, and I learned a lot more about fungi, and now I'm much more like aware of any time I see fungi. I feel like I, you know, have at least a greater appreciation for it. So that is all for my March wrap up. I would love to chat with you guys about any of these books in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!